Clinical psychologist and leadership injury expert, Dr. April Minatrea. She is going to unpack for us how do we become healthy leaders and how do we heal from leadership wounds in our past so that we have the greatest impact. So, Dr. April, how did that journey start for you?
It really was born out of my work with military veterans. I was talking with a ton of people who had invisible injuries, post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Most of us are familiar with that. And yet a lot of people don't realize there are different kinds of invisible injuries. There's something called moral injury. Whoa. There are things, and that affects people beyond veterans, right?
So unpack that, because I think that's key.
Sure. So for example, a moral injury is something where you're put in a situation, and it may be something that happens on the job. Think of, for example, frontline workers with COVID, right? Where they're in a situation where their policy tells them that they have to do this, but then they've got a family in front of them that needs them to do this, right? And so you're faced with this decision, and that moral injury comes when you're put in a situation that tears at the fabric of your soul. And so, of course, it happens with veterans, but it's not exclusive to that. And so that idea of like, oh, there's different types of invisible injuries kind of became this incubation for the concept of leadership injury. Oh. And again, with veterans, very hierarchical structure. And there are things where people have been hurt by leaders or they've been hurt as leaders. And again, certainly not restricted to the military. I think most of the work I do now is with leadership injuries that are maybe in the workplace, but it doesn't start there. This applies to all different kinds of leaders.
Absolutely.
Let's go back. As you well know, our first leaders are our parents or our caregivers, right? And there's so much that happens because we're so impressionable at that age. And then it becomes teachers and coaches. Exactly. You're reading my mind. And pastors. How much has church hurt impacted people? That's right. And then, of course, it also happens in the workplace as well. And so most of us are carrying different kinds of injuries. And I liken it to a sports injury, right? Or any kind of old injury where you have a physical something. And by the way, there are some things that you're like, okay, we're going to walk it off, like rub some dirt on it. It's going to be fine. So not everything that we encounter does lasting damage.
Sure.
So I've made a distinction between leadership injury, just in general, and there are some things that are critical leadership injuries.
Okay.
And when we mean critical, it's not necessarily because somebody was being critical of you, although that could be the case. It's really more, if we think about critical injury, it's like, oh, that's something that has a lasting effect. That's something that's more serious. And so this is not just the bumps and bruises and you're able to shake it, Taylor Swift, to shake it off. You're going to be fine. These are the things that, like, for whatever reason, it got lodged in your soul. And it changed how you saw yourself, other people. I think the issue of leadership injury is really key because it impacts how we interact with authority. So we could have a peer-to-peer exchange, and we could maybe, one of us steps on the other's toes, and that's uncomfortable. We can work through that. But when it happens with somebody in authority, when it happens with a leader, then now there's like an emotional hashtag. Leadership. Okay, every time I'm in a hashtag authority, okay, now I'm bringing all of the ideas and feelings that I had from that previous experience. So now that it is, okay, that was with my parent or that was with my teacher. It happened with my teacher, but now I'm doing that with my boss 30 years later because it's part of hashtag authority. It also impacts our relationship with God, And so there's huge implications for that. The good news, I found that just like we can have negative things that happen with leaders who hurt us or maybe were, bad bosses and all of that kind of stuff, there's also an opportunity for people to act as redemptive leaders.
Whoa, good.
Yes, there is hope and there is healing. And so I have a step-by-step process for helping people heal from leadership injuries. But also the work I do is aimed at helping leaders become those redemptive leaders who can help heal and even prevent leadership injuries in other people. And I think that's a lot of what has to happen, especially in the business world. We have so many leaders, you might have a team full of injured players.
And I think a lot of leaders can resonate that they're like, oh my gosh, I inherited this situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
stressful.
And so
Or step parents, you can also inherit some situations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Because there's something about, hashtag mom or hashtag dad that now, okay, even somebody else in that role is calling up those same filters, those same ideas.
Right.
And so for leaders who are dealing with those inherited injuries, they are in that tough position of having to clean up a mess they didn't make and fix something they didn't break.
Yeah. And that's hard to not just get resentful that it's unfair.
Welcome to leadership.
Yes.
You want an extra responsibility. Woo! This is why they pay you the big bucks. Awesome. Yes. Welcome to leadership.
So think of it in your brain that when she's doing hashtag, there's actual neural pathways, there's regions of the brain, and especially in your hippocampus, which lives next to your amygdala, which is the fire alarm. So all these memories get stored, and it's not like you're thinking about the person from your past. It's an automatic, just like your cell phone has automaticity, it turns on the password for you just by face recognition. Similar when you go leader, mom, pastor, coach, principal, teacher, your brain will auto-populate. And so that's what she's referencing when she's saying hashtag, because I think it's culturally relevant and beautiful. I'm just bringing down like the neuroscience part that there's regions of the brain dedicated to that without you having to think of it. And that's hard when I work with people. They always go, no, but I'm not thinking about anybody else. This is this person only that I'm mad at. And I'm like, yes, and when have you felt this way before? Maybe not this person, but when have you felt this way before? When have you experienced something similar? When have these same thought processes, when have these same neural pathways been active? Exactly.
And oftentimes if we can go back to that initial thing and say, oh, what did I come to believe? Because so I love like our chemistry, you come from that more psychodynamic perspective. So you're all about the unconscious things. I was trained cognitive behaviorally. So it's a really nice match to be able to say, okay, well, how are you thinking about this and how is that influencing your behavior? Right. And if we can shift your beliefs, then we can shift your behavior and help you show up differently. As a leader, your task may not be just to shift your own beliefs. Yes, you need to do your own work.
Please do.
You will create around you what's going on inside you.
We call it an ecosystem. What lives in you will live around you. So if you're seeing things in your leadership, just be aware there may be something in your ecosystem.
Right. I mean, that's the awesome responsibility and power of being a leader is the opportunity to create culture. So you may be needing to do that with other people, but then you're like, oh, so there's a belief system operating there, perhaps because of an injury, and I need to find a way to lead that's going to shift that. That's going to restore, that's going to bring healing, that's going to challenge a negative narrative that they've never spoken. Yeah. But I see the results of it. I see the symptoms. I see those outcomes. I see, oh, this person always shuts down in this situation. Oh, this person's highly reactive, right? Because there's not just one blueprint of, oh, if you have a leadership injury, it's going to manifest like this. Right. The same as sports injuries, right? Okay, there's different types. Bones break in different ways. Well, this one pierced the skin, that one didn't. Some need to be set, some don't. In terms of like, oh, we need hardware for that. So there's different types of symptoms.
What do you think are just practical things people can be looking? Because I'm thinking through that in my mind, if it's like, we don't walk around going, I have an injury inside, right? Your body and your soul can kind of compartmentalize that really beautifully. So when you're looking as a leader of reactive or shutting down as examples, what do you think people can be looking for to go, oh, there may be an injury, a pre-existing injury or a current created injury that we're dealing with?
I think one of the biggest things to be on the lookout for is there a change in normal behavior or normal responses, and is that change disproportionate to the situation? Yeah. That's, I would say, the number one indicator. Okay, so I gave a little bit of corrective feedback. I thought it was constructive. Yeah. And the response I got was either, rage, yelling, and stomping out of the room, or it was tears and complete breakdown or whatever. Like, oh, instead of like, hey, thanks, I'll work on that.
Like, that's great feedback.
Yeah, it's great feedback. That's hard to hear, but I'll do my best to, right? If somebody's really reactive in one way or the other. I think the other thing is if you just notice like, hey, this person is not showing up in certain situations, or it's creating conflict with the team, or anytime we talk about this, or anytime there's this kind of situation, ooh, oh, there's friction. It feels like there's resistance. And
Yeah.
you'll notice it, even as a leader, if it's an injury in someone else, you may be able to perceive it in your own body. When I'm around this person and this thing is happening, I start to feel this tightness in my chest or something in here. Your gut, or you notice
Shoulders going up.
my shoulders are at my ears. Like those kinds of things where the tension's rising.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that says there's more going on
Sure.
than meets the eye. And so
Yeah.
I think one of the things you're really strong at is creating that idea of like, just be curious. Like, let's approach this with kindness, compassion, and curiosity.
Yeah.
I wonder if this person has been hurt before in this way. I wonder if they encountered something in the past that caused them to shut down.
Right.
And it can be a range of things. I've seen, just to give us some examples, I've seen things that have happened in the boardroom and one client I worked with, he had a CEO who ripped him a new one in front of everybody.
Whoa.
Right? And so that was
one and then two when you do it in front of people.
Right. That extra layer of things. And this was a very high functioning, high level executive in the company. But that experience just
Shut him down.
Right? And it destroyed his confidence.
Yeah.
And it really altered his career, not so much because of the thing that he was getting blasted about, or even because of how the CEO thought of him, but because how he thought of himself from that moment forward, and the loss of confidence impacting his ability to go forward and like really put himself out there, take risks, speak up, initiate all of those things that are required for that driving to say like, hey, we're going to move forward. I'm going to get you results. I'm going to take the risk and get you the results that are going to get me a reward.
Yes.
And he wasn't able to do that. Cool part, when we addressed the leadership injury, he had left that company and kind of stepped away from that, but he actually ended up in a CEO position with another organization after we addressed the leadership injury. So there's hope and there's healing, and it can be those big things like that. But then here's the other thing that I just want to make people mindful of. It can also be what we call micro trauma, right? Little things you and I have talked about, like when we're young, we're really impressionable. It's kind of like the wet cement.
Yep.
And, if you step on something while that cement is still wet, while that personality is still being formed, while those ideas about the self and the world are still being formed, then it really leaves an impact in a way that it wouldn't. If that cement was dry, like somebody can step on it, it's not going to make a big deal.
Right.
But those things that happen when we're young, they get stuck in there. And so I had a conversation with somebody. It was something that her third grade teacher said. Corrected her in front of the class when the teacher had asked for feedback, and the child gave it, and the teacher was offended by what she said. And so she snapped at her. And so then the little take-home message in her little brain and in her little heart was, don't speak up in front of authority. Fast forward, now in her career, she's a young adult. She's right. She's very smart and vibrant. By the way, she was right with what she told the teacher. Right? The teacher was wrong, but the teacher was insecure. By the way, this is another thing that happens. A lot of times leadership injuries happen when the leader is insecure.
Right.
And then they're
Absolutely.
They're pushing, doubling down, right? And unable to admit those mistakes.
Right.
In her case, like that, I'm not going to speak up in front of authority. How are you going to navigate in your career? And again, how are you going to be able to show up in a way that gets you noticed and promoted and being able to advance to the fullest level that you're capable of?
Right.
Until you address that injury.
Because we might be self-protecting or censoring ourselves.
Absolutely.
And so they don't get to see the full potential of what's in you. Right. And I think it's really key to point out that it's not just we go, okay, I'm going to make a vow that I won't be like that boss or that leader. So like your gentleman that was under a CEO and now has become a CEO, most people just make a vow like, well, then I just won't lead like that. I'll lead in this other way. The problem is whatever you don't deal with, it's not consciously mediated. So that modeling, that mirror neuron experience will do one of two extremes. One, you're more likely to have the knee-jerk reaction come out of you and you're like, oh, wait, what happened? Like put that back inside. but it's not healed. So then it will come back. And or you went to the other extreme, and an overcompensation is still just as damaging, because an overcompensation means I'm going to censor myself or edit myself, kind of like the female that you're just referencing, which I think a lot of female executives work with, of trying to like not be the bitch and trying to, you know, be powerful and show up, but not too much, because their whole life they've been taught a certain way. So we have overcompensations, and or we just suppress, and then it gets, you know, bubbled out of us like a volcano. So I appreciate the middle space. What do people do in the middle to actually work on a leadership wound rather than just deciding they're not going to be like that person?
So I'm glad you asked. We have basically a step-by-step process that we take people through. And the first one of those things is simply to recognize the impact of what's happened. And especially when it's that thing that it was something my third grade teacher said. Why am I having to deal? Right?
It's not a big deal.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But even those micro traumas are traumas.
Sure. Yeah.
And the cool part is the same kinds of processes that heal the major trauma that works with military veterans and combat trauma. You can use some of those same steps and apply that process to heal these micro traumas that show up in other ways. And so the first thing is to recognize the impact. You're going to have a hard time healing what you're not acknowledging.
Right.
Then the second piece of it is really to receive validation.
That's huge. Huge.
It starts recognizing the impact, starts that process with validating it yourself. Like, hey, right or wrong, I wish it hadn't, but that affected me.
Yeah.
And then especially if you're able to receive validation from another person that says, that really sucks. Like that never should have happened to you. That was an injustice.
Right.
Right. And if we don't do that, a couple things happen. One is it keeps screaming at us, right? I mean, think about just even in an interpersonal conversation.
Yeah.
Why do people yell? It's because they feel like they're not being heard. And so that's what happens.
Overcompensation, by the way.
Right? So that's what happens in our hearts. If we feel like we're not being heard, if that pain's not being acknowledged, it'll get louder and louder and louder. And the other thing that happens is I think it hijacks the rest of the healing process. So many people, and I find this a lot in the Christian circles, people really want to jump to like forgiveness.
Right. Foreclosing on the healing.
Foreclosing on the healing. I'm not going to be mad about that. I'm going to just forgive, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can choose to be mad about it or not. But if you don't address that pain, then you're not actually receiving comfort. You're not actually receiving what you need in the emotions, right? Because our soul is our mind, our will, and our emotions. I recommend start with the emotions first. They're the ones that are the most swirly and squirrely. If you can get that nailed down, the rest is going to be much simpler.
Yeah.
And I also liken it back to the injury analogy, right? If you walk into the ER with a gunshot wound, right? Would they say, well, hey, we'll give you some pain meds as soon as you forgive the person who shot you? Like, no. Why don't we start with some pain management and then everything else we need to do, that surgery to get rid of whatever's going on, clean out that wound, whatever that is, if we've got to drain something or whatever, it gets kind of gross in there. But if we have some pain management first, and that's what the receiving validation really does.
So let me pause you, because you have defense mechanisms. I have defense mechanisms that go, no, it's not a problem. It's fine. I've got this. It's not that big of a deal. Other people have it worse. While that justification sounds really valid, it's actually a way to keep pain locked inside. And pain does not heal with time. It festers with time and it becomes a bitter root. And we're going to do a whole episode on that. So keep going, because I think that this is key.
We don't want those injuries to get infected. And here's a little hack. If your defense mechanism says it's not that big a deal, then you can say back that it won't be that hard to deal with it.
Oh, I like the little sass.
Yeah, it won't be that. If it's not a big deal, we'll just talk to somebody like Dr. Shannan, Dr. Crawford about it.
Or Dr. Minatrea.
Yes. And maybe we can get this cleared right up, right? So that's the second piece. We start with the recognizing the impact, then we receive the validation, and then we're ready to release that negativity.
Cool.
And so are we holding on to any judgments? Are we holding on to offense or bitterness, any of those kinds of things? And if so, then we want to release those. And by the way, that might not just be against the other person. It might be against ourselves. It might be against how we reacted when they started yelling at us or what we didn't do in that situation. So
back to even the moral injury, where I'm doing something incongruent with who I want to be. And so having to work through that, reconcile and forgive myself.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. And when we release that negativity, something shifts, right? And the cool part about that is actually an act of the will. You can choose to do it, right? The receiving validation will help with the feelings part and the emotion, but this, it's an act of the will.
Yeah.
And you can choose to say, I'm going to release that. I'm no longer going to hold that in the balance of accounts against myself or against the other person. Yeah. I'm going to release the need for that person to be punished, for me to be punished.
Right.
I'm going to release the blame that I've carried, and I'm going to just release the weight. I'm no longer going to let that take up real estate inside my head, inside my heart, inside my soul.
Yeah.
And it really is about setting ourselves free. It's
Right.
not even so much for the other person. They might not ever know it happened. But we will no longer be spending mental and emotional time and energy on that when we release that negativity.
So good.
So that's our third step. Our fourth step, we want to re-examine our powerful decisions. Because when we get hurt, we do tend to make those like judgments or vows of like, okay, I am never, this is Scarlett O'Hara, as God is my witness, I will never do this again. I will never speak up in front of authority again, right? Or I will never take this risk. I'm never going to put myself out there. Or, oh, nobody's going to talk to me like that if they try, right? So, because by the way, it can be, you can have people who bow up and then you can also have people who shut down.
Yeah.
You see both patterns. But whatever that powerful decision that you made when you got hurt, that was maybe that knee-jerk reaction of, ow, that's not going to happen again. And again, your defense mechanisms are there to protect you. Okay, well, now that we've done some pain management, now that we've released the negativity, we've drained things, if you will, and cleaned things out, like, hey, let's take a more objective look at that. Is that powerful decision that we made about how we're going to show up and what we are or not going to do, is that going to serve us well moving forward? And I think that's one of the places where oftentimes we're not aware, as long as this remains unconscious, we're not even aware of the limiting beliefs that we're holding or how they're holding us back. And so this is that part of like saying, hey, we're going to take what's unconscious, we're going to put it on the table.
Perfect.
Let's re-examine those powerful decisions. There may be certain things that you say, no, I really do want to move differently in the world because of this happening. And sometimes there's a middle ground. I'm not going to keep doing things the way that I was before, but I'm also not going to the opposite extreme and overcompensating. Right. Here's the middle ground. Here's the healthy perspective for moving forward. And then that leads us into the fifth step, which is redeeming our story. I love that. And what if that thing that happened, what was the setback, becomes the setup for something better? And so I love to think in terms of story. I acknowledge every hero has a backstory, right? And there's no shame in that. So if you have an injury in your history, like, welcome to the club.
Yes.
As you said, I don't think anybody gets off the planet without encountering this
together. Yeah.
We're all in this together. Every hero has a backstory, but you get to decide, am I going to remain a victim or am I going to become a victor? Am I going to use that thing? And this is where, with veterans, we talk about not just post-traumatic stress, we talk about post-traumatic growth. How can I use that difficult situation, not just get back to status quo, but actually catapult me to something better and maybe something where now, because I understand this process and I've been through it, now I become that redemptive leader who actually shows up differently and begins to help heal other people in the way that I lead.
That's so good. So for time, we have to wrap today. But if you want to hear more, Dr. Minatrea is a guest on our e-course, Restoring Self-Cohesion, crawfordclinics.com. You can go to our e-course and we unpack a lot of the restoring self-cohesion, the process that we're talking about. It's a deeper dive. Obviously, this is a podcast, so it's a little more surface level for conversation purposes. But if you want to hear more and you want to figure out what is that knee-jerk reaction, or why do I shut down around leaders, or why do I overcompensate and put my foot in my mouth and I'm like, dang it, why do I do that? Then you'll want this e-course, and she is a guest on that one. And then we're also recording another episode on fulfilling your dreams. So be sure to connect with us on that one. And it is a joy and a privilege. How do people connect with you?
Thanks for asking. They can go to leadershipinjury.com if this is the area that they're wanting to.
I love that you got that URL. That's great.
I did. So that one's easy to remember. That might be easier to spell than aprilminatrea.com. So leadershipinjury.com if that's kind of what you're wanting to learn more about, or also Dr. April Speaks. And that'll be an entry into all things April.
And you're a brilliant communicator. I've heard you speak, and the crowds love you. So you can also book her for a speaking engagement if you want to create a healthy ecosystem in your leadership space, in your organization. And then you do individual coaching, and then you have courses as well.
Yes, I
Love
do.
it.
Yes.
Well, hope you guys have such a great day. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you for the next episode. Bye.